I'm emotional right now. The Eagles just won the Super Bowl. You could say I'm in a desperate state. So my takes might be a little colored. Let's move on.
Can I can
Myles
I can
Garrett,
I can I offer a little sprinkle here?
please.
The good news is we're 12-5. We went 12-5. We won 2 playoff games. We can have this conversation about what we need to do
Yep.
to catch the Eagles, and it's not completely absurd. We got Jaden
Hey,
Daniels as quarterback.
even better news, Matt Stafford and Aaron Rodgers are potentially available, and we're not talking about either of them. That's the
Awesome.
last time you'll hear either of us mention them until they sign with the Cleveland Browns or the Pittsburgh Steelers or any other team in the NFL that we don't care about. Let's get into it. Myles Garrett, Cooper Kupp, Deebo Samuel, all available for trade. How do we feel about this, Pop? Are there guys? I will just say right off the bat, I've been saying it on Twitter since it said became available. You pay asking price plus 20% tip. When the Cleveland Browns spin around the iPad and they say tip, please, you press the 25% for Myles Garrett. You pay them whatever they want and then some when the talent like that becomes available. Kupp and Debo, I don't care. What do you think, Pop? Pop's going to play this conservative.
Well, I'm going to correct you on one thing. Myles Garrett has requested a trade. Cleveland Browns are not currently answering the phone. Now, that could definitely
That'll
change.
change.
Probably will change. I'm not quite as gung-ho as you. I've got a price. I've got a trade proposal, what I would propose we do. And that's this year's first, Deron Payne, next year's second. That's my limit on what I would trade. I don't think that gets the deal done, but that's my offer to Cleveland Browns for Myles Garrett. So I think it's pretty substantial. First round pick. Next year's first is going to be a late pick anyway. So I want to go this year's first, Deron Payne, next year's second. Make the trade. Somewhere in that range.
I think that could get it done. I think something in that realm could get
That's
it
my
done.
trade proposal. I would do that.
I would do 2-1s. I wouldn't have a problem with it.
I don't know.
2-1s and Payne for all I'm concerned with. Like
I said,
you can't mortgage.
You can't mortgage the future. You've got to continue to draft. You got to continue to build through the draft. It feels like we're just in this mode where everyone wants to trade away all our picks and look for now. And I just feel like
But
there's
this
a lot
guy
of holes on
was.
this team, which we'll
The
get
bottom
into.
line is you'd be hard pressed to find a guy quicker to move off a draft pick and be more aggressive in acquiring talent than Howie Roseman. I mean, how many ones did they trade for AJ Brown? At least one, I think maybe two. That panned out. The trading all those draft picks for Tyreek Hill panned out for the Dolphins. When there's elite talent made available, and in my opinion, Myles Garrett is that. There's no opinion. Myles Garrett is elite talent. That's undeniable. The guy was drafted number 1 overall. You pencil him in for 15 sacks every year. He does not miss games. He's 29. I understand that, but he's got a lot of ball left in him. There's a lot of ball left in him. He's in incredible shape. He's a complete physical specimen. Great guy in the locker room and off the field. This is a multiple time Walter Payton of the Year nominee. I think he might have won a couple. There's not a bad thing to say about the guy. And Myles Garrett by himself moves this team from NFC contender to Super Bowl contender. Moves them right into that tier. Just Myles Garrett.
I mean, I would say this. I kind of look at, I think we have 27 free agents or something like that, just short of 30. And there are people talking about, well, this year's roster might turn over as much as last year's roster. I kind of hope not. I kind of hope we're bringing, good 10 or 12 of those guys back because we were close. You are right. And I think that we're more like in that 8 to 10 players away of upgrading 8 to 10 players away from really being able to contend, right? But we got a lot of needs. O-line is still a need. Running back's a need. You could argue running back's a need. Wide receivers a need. We got an aging tight end. Maybe we can get by for one more year, but we're going to have to find some answers there. I think speed at linebacker is an issue that we're going to need to address at some point. We know edge, which Myles Garrett would address. There's just a lot of needs on this team. And that's the only thing that worries me about just trading away too many picks. And that's why I don't mind the idea of a player like a Deron Payne, right? Really good player. I think has some great credibility in the league. I know you're going to have to give up something like that. I'd almost rather go more in that direction than than giving up draft picks, right? I just
So, and
and I kind of feel like I bring up Duran for a couple of reasons. I think his value is greater than say a John Allen, right? And he's under contract, right, for a couple of more years. And I think John Allen and Johnny Newton played pretty well together, right? So, and I think John Allen's a guy that might want to stick around and probably knows that he's not at the top end of the market anymore, in terms of what his contract demands would be. That's where my ideas about Deron Payne would come in. And I think if you're the Browns, you could save face a little bit with a trade like that because you're getting a really good player for on the defensive line back. That's my logic, right? But I don't think
I
it's
like
going to
it.
be enough to get that deal done. And going much
Ultimate,
higher than that, 2 first round picks, people, I know the counter argument, they're going to be 2 late picks. We don't know that. We want to think this team, and I'm a believer that this team is going to be 12 wins or better next year. I am a believer in that. But you just never know. They won a lot of close games this year. It's a different schedule. There's some tough games out there. I mean, that could be a top 20 pick. You never know.
yeah.
You
I
know,
mean, the bottom line is, look, there's in all assets of life, there's risk with success, and success oftentimes is directly tied to risk. Some interesting statistics going with the draft pick stuff. Only about 40 to 50%. The number's 44% from 2011 to 2020 of first round draft picks sign with the team that drafted them after the first 4 to 5 years. So, just using basic math, let's call it 50-50. If you trade 2 first round picks, you're only trading one guy that you think is going to stay around. And I'd be willing to bet, I don't know, but I'd be willing to bet that that curve tapers off as you get towards the later end of the rounds. And you're right, we don't know where the draft pick is going to be next year, but we know this year's draft pick is 28, 29. Like, that's not, you're not
those are good
getting Miles
points.
Garrett at 29.
Those are good points, and I think probably some of the overall answer is what else are we able to do in free agency, right?
Yes.
What else are we able to do in free agency? I think there's some good thought around that. What about Cooper Cup and Devo Samuel? What are your thoughts there? I mean,
So
I'm
initially,
not sized about either
I'm
guy.
on it.
I
I'm
feel
uninterested in Cooper Cup.
I feel both guys are a few years past their best seasons. Now, whether Debo might be closer to getting it back, I don't know. But I feel like he really splashed a few years back, and we just haven't seen that same. Ever since he kind of complained about he didn't want to be running the ball as much, we saw a different player just as more of a pure wide receiver than when he was that dual threat combo.
So I think Cooper Cup I'm uninterested in just because at this point,
Tend
as
to
late
agree.
into his at late into you don't agree? You're
I
more
tend to
interested
no.
in
I
Cooper
said
Cup?
I agree.
Oh, you tend to agree.
Tend to
Okay.
agree.
Sorry, I didn't hear you.
No, I actually completely agree. I should
Yeah,
say.
I don't even think I'd pay a sixth rounder for Cooper Cup, to be honest with you. It's just not interesting to me. The contract is tough. Debo, I think, has a better chance of matching that production on his contract. I saw on Twitter today from a guy that leans towards speculative but also is pretty reliable that about a fifth rounder would do it. For that price, I'd certainly be interested in Debo. I find it hard to believe that's going to be the price. But for that price, do it. No problems with it. I think he would be. What I like about Debo is I think he is. I think he could. I think he's a good 1B. That's not a guy that's going to want to come in and get 15 targets a game. But it's a good complementary skill set to Terry, and especially in the run game. And bottom line is, if you get traded for a fifth round pick, you don't really get to say, hey, I don't want to be doing X, Y, and Z anymore. You're no longer that caliber of player.
Got a little
And
diva in him.
I'm not so sure about that. I like what I've seen from Debo character wise, but I would do it. Absolutely. For a fifth rounder. Absolutely. But I don't think you can afford to trade for Myles Garrett and Debo Samuel and take on both those contracts and make some moves in free agency. So for that reason, if Garrett can happen, the rest of these Debo who? Cooper who? I have no interest. But if you can't get Garrett, then
I
sure,
agree.
go
For
get
a
Debo
fifth
with a fifth.
rounder, I would definitely consider that. I would agree with that. If that's the price,
Yeah.
a lot more than that, probably not.
Yeah, I asked Twitter today. I said Myles Garrett for two firsts, Cooper Cup for a fifth, or Debo Samuel for a second and a fifth, because that was the comp for Stephon Diggs last season. So I figured that was about right. And it was 50-50. Half the people voted for Garrett, half the people voted for Samuel. No votes for Cup. So
That's
I think we're all in
that's
agreement on
Garrett
that.
all the way in my mind.
I agree too.
Yeah.
2 and 5 is way too much. So, and this brings us to our next point, which is free agency. And I got a point I want to make about this, which tonight's result does not help for this point. But Dan Granziano, our Paisan, I don't think it's a stretch to say that there's a good chance this guy's got some Italian somewhere in his blood with that name. Our Paisan, Dan
100%.
Granziano,
Daniele
says,
Graziano.
yeah, he's good at the Sugo at any point. He says Adam Peters is going guns blazing with defensive improvements being a priority in free agency. Per Rigo's Rag, I guess, quoted him. Um, I love it. I think that's exactly what you need to be. I think you need to sell out. If tonight's outcome proves anything, it's that defense is very important. And my number one acquisition this offseason is not Myles Garrett. It is not T. Higgins. My number one acquisition this offseason is Josh Sweat from the Philadelphia Eagles. You give him 20% more than what Philly's willing to give him. That kid is a stud. He is an unbelievable defensive lineman. He's a great player. And you weaken the Eagles, which is a huge bonus. Because they can't keep having all that talent around there. You either make them overpay for him or you let him come on down 95 and come hang out in Washington, D.C. I would pay anything. I tweeted it, and this could be the emotion, but make the trade for Garrett and then give the blank check to Sweat.
Yeah, and I think what I want to kind of focus on, I mean, that's a good take by you, but I want to focus on just let's talk about like just the general idea of this is some of the exact quote. Expect the Commanders from Dan Graziano. Expect the Commanders to be aggressive this offseason in pursuing roster upgrades on defense, so specifically on defense, because they feel like we had a great offense. We could put up points. They still feel confident that we can do that on offense, maybe with some smaller additions. But if they really focus on strengthening the defense and being able to counter what a great defense the Eagles have, right, with a strong defense on our side, not just the Eagles, the rest of the league. But what about the idea of that focusing on the defense, right? Because there's two ways to go with this, right? Not to say maybe you can do a little bit of both, but put your energy into the defense, kind of run it back with the offense if you had to choose. Because I'm kind of on the page of I want to protect my best asset, and my best asset is Jaden Daniels, and I want to
Yeah.
put a better offensive line to protect him. I want to give him more weapons. I want to do things where he doesn't have to always wear the Superman cape to win games for us, right? And he was having to put that Superman cape on a lot. So I was of the mindset going into this offseason that we should focus on getting the offense right as a slightly greater priority than focusing on the defense. This seems to suggest the exact opposite, which if I seem to remember right, was the page you were on. I'm going by my rule, by what we talked about earlier with Myles Garrett and the other guys, and this. And AP, I trust. I understand the logic behind this approach, but what say you?
Yeah. I personally am more on the defense. I think I would like them to upgrade on the offensive line, depending on what's available, depending on what you can afford. I think I've said it. I think you need more help on the interior. Cosme likely to miss some time at the beginning of the year. That's not reported. That's me speculating based off the nature of that injury and the time that it happened. And based on the nature of that injury, there's no guarantee he comes back to form. You pray he does, but you have to play him that he doesn't. So you need more depth on that offensive line. You cannot have Trent Scott. God bless him. I think he did the best job with the talent he has available. You cannot have Trent Scott taking meaningful snaps in January for this franchise if you want to win a Super Bowl. You just can't. So you need to add depth on that offensive line. I agree. But I think that defense just proved to be unwin-withable by the end of the year. And I think you've got a good core on that defense with Luvu and with Samerstill and with Lattimore. But, talking like positions of need, I think two of the three are on the defensive side of the ball, in my opinion. If we're going to do top three. So that would probably be in no particular order for me. Edge, cornerback, and offensive line, probably interior offensive line
But
guard.
what's your order? I want an order. I want a 1, 2, 3 order. You're going to your top three
edge,
names.
edge, guard, corner, specifically left guard. And if you want to move Coleman over to left guard because you can get an elite left tackle, fine. But those are my three: edge, guard, corner, in that order.
Yeah, so my top three are definitely offensive line, number one. I go tackle. I go left tackle because I feel like maybe Coleman's that guy, but I don't think we're 100% convinced yet. And if you can get and I would prefer it to be in the draft, in the first round of the draft. And I know it's late first, but sometimes a lot of really good tackles tend to fall because, the higher profile positions like receiver and quarterback and stuff tend to go early. They get overdrafted. Sometimes these offensive linemen get underdrafted a bit. So I would love to go left tackle because Coleman does have the ability to play guard. He can play right tackle, which we need a right tackle as well, by the way. So I would go left tackle. If I could, again, perfect world, what would be my number one priority? The best player that I'd like to acquire this offseason, it would be a left tackle. That's my number one. Number two is edge. So Myles Garrett definitely falls within that. But I worry about our ability to satisfy my number one priority by going after that number two as the best player that we're going to acquire this offseason. For three, I think it's getting Jaden Daniels another weapon, and that would be a wide receiver. I think I wouldn't hate it if that was a dynamic running back, but getting him another weapon, I'd lean towards wide receiver. If it was a dynamic running back, I wouldn't hate that either. I feel like we can run it back at tight end. I'm cool with running it back at tight end. So that'd be my top three. I really want to adjust the offensive line, at least adding one starter. And, I'm good with running it back with the guys we got, but I want to add a starter. And you said Cosme may not even be available week one. Most likely he won't be.
Yeah.
With the injury, right? Most likely he won't be. So you've got
might
to
not be in shape. Yeah. I like the wide receiver and the running back thing is interesting for me, and I think this will probably be it for us. We'll probably wrap it up after this point, Pop. I think you can upgrade at wide receiver and running back without having to spend a ton. Like, I think you can upgrade at running back without going and getting Saquon Barkley. I think you can upgrade at wide receiver without spending $1 million on T. Higgins. I think, or several $1 million. I said $1 million as if it's hyperbole. This is NFL we're talking. I guess say $1 billion for a hyperbole. I think there are guys that are better than Olamide Zaccheaus, God bless him, but you can still get for a reasonable price. I think there are guys that are better than Brian Robinson that you can still get for a reasonable price or reasonable draft capital. I think a third-round guy could come in and knock Brian Robinson out of his job based off of what we saw in the second half of the season. So I don't put those playmakers so high on my priorities list because I still feel like if we can keep Ertz around, with McLaurin, and with hopefully, look, Jahan Dotson was the plan this year. They didn't trade Jahan Dotson until training camp, and there was an attitude issue or an unforeseen scheme fit issue or something like that. But the plan was for there to be, we can all agree, Super Bowl champion, Jahan Dotson has more talent, raw talent, than the guys that were out there, right? That was supposed to be the plan this year. Didn't work out for a multitude of reasons, but they will upgrade at those skill position groups without splashing, in my opinion. And I would not splash. The premium that it costs for the guys that are available. You want to talk about availability issues? How many games has T. Higgins missed in the last couple of years? And he wants to go be a number one somewhere. I don't. That's not here.
But you gotta build a little bit of an issue, and it's one of the problems that, and this will be my final point because I agree we should wrap. But maybe I'll plant the seed for future pod discussions about all of this.
I like it.
You got a first, a second, a third, which is Philly's third, so it's a late third. Our third would be a late third too. 5 from New Orleans, so that would be early fifth. Then you got 3 late 7th round picks. Those are your draft picks. You don't have a lot of draft capital right now, and we're talking about trading way more. You're talking about punting this year's draft. I don't love it. I just don't love it as a general overall idea philosophy, and I think a lot of it stems from the Marshawn Lattimore trade, but I think that it's from a guy that was pretty adamant, Adam Peters, that he wants to build through the draft. You don't have a ton of draft capital to work with this year. You just don't. And then you start eating away at next year's picks and the year after. I don't love it. I just don't love it. And it's a multifaceted problem. It's not that you want to turn away from a guy like Myles Garrett. You don't. But like I said, don't have a lot of draft capital to work with, and that's a concern for me.
I hear you. I'll give my 30-second take on that concern, and then we wrap this thing up. I think if you got out of this draft, if we didn't make the Lattimore trade and we don't make the Garrett trade, and out of this draft you got nothing except for a player that performs at the caliber that we know Marshawn Lattimore is capable of, and a player that performs at the caliber that we think Myles Garrett is capable of for the next 3 to 4 years, you would say this draft was a rousing success. So if you're able to get that and you have to punt on the draft, I don't care. That's my personal opinion. When elite talent becomes available and both of those guys are elite, I'm okay to pursue it. But ultimately, you gave your stance, Pop. This is my stance. I think we go back and forth on this for probably 2 hours, and I don't think either of us are trading it. So we should probably wrap this thing up. Save it.
I'm about to turn into the pumpkin. The Cinderella's about to turn into a pumpkin.
We're both pushing late hours here by the time I get this edit and upload done, and by the time Pop logs off here. So we should wrap this thing up. This has been a lot of fun. Congratulations to the Philadelphia Eagles. Season's over.
Oh, man.
Eagles fans have you got another like 14 minutes, and then it's a new season. Everybody's 0-0, so enjoy it. Let's wrap this thing up. Congratulations to the Philadelphia Eagles for your Super Bowl. Glad you got it in before Jaden Daniels got a competitive roster around him. Enjoy them. Yeah, stay safe. Without further ado, let's wrap this thing up. I've been Dom.
This is Pop.
Thank you all for another great week, and hail to the Commanders.
Hail.